Hello and welcome to another session by the Instituto Juan de Mariana. Today, as you see, we're not speaking Spanish. We're rather using English to connect with our guest, who is Rainer Zitelmann. Welcome, joining us from Berlin in Germany.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Now, let me tell you a bit. Rainer has just released an amazing book in Spain. It's called El Capitalismo no es el problema, es la solución. Here you have a copy. It's out on Unión Editorial, and it's a book that was originally released in English, and you can see it's well positioned on my bookshelf under the title The Power of Capitalism. However, the translation of El Capitalismo no es el problema, es la solución is the original title of the book in German, and we thought it would be interesting to have it like that. Now, Dr. Zitelmann is a doctor, PhD, both in history and sociology. He has completed a remarkable career in the world of journalism and publishing, but mostly at a certain point in his life, he decided to take on the risk and to dare to be an entrepreneur, in which he succeeded greatly. Today, he is the manager of different companies. He's made good money in different areas of the economy, but mostly he's always remained an intellectual, unlike other people that we see in the business world, which fail to stop and take the time to study how does that market economy work and how does it operate. Well, Mr. Zitelmann has in fact released more than 20 books. Many of them are available in some languages, such as English, but many others. Some of them are even bestsellers in countries like China. And this one, The Power of Capitalism, has been very well received. You will see that experts from the Adam Smith Institute or the Institute of Economic Affairs have recommended this book. Now, as you know, all of you following us from Spain and many of you from Latin America, you know that the Hispanic world has been waging a big battle against the rise of post-communism, of modern communism. And right now, even in Spain, we've waged an electoral campaign where the main message was to position capitalism versus communism. And Rainer, you're a good expert on this because being German, you felt and you suffered directly from the consequences of having your country literally split in half and put under two completely different economic systems. What does the book explain about this, and how do you share this experience today, many years after that a wall was finally brought down?
Yes, thank you for your introduction. First of all, this is not a book about theory. It's on the contrary, it's without any theory. It's a book about economic history. So I don't compare a theory with the real world, but I compare real life experience in different countries, because, you know, this is the trick from socialists. They have any idea or any book, and then they compare the reality. And of course, this is always a problem for the reality. This is not what I'm doing in this book. I compare, for example, the book starts with China. And I think this is a good example, because what a lot of people don't know, that in the end of the 50s in China, 45 million people died as a result of the biggest socialist experiment in history. I have so many lectures all over the world, and I ask young people very often, have you heard about this so-called Great Leap Forward, about the socialist experiment, where so many people died, 45 million? Almost no one heard about it. So the book starts with this. And then even in 1981, some years after Mao Zedong's death, 88% of the people in China were living in extreme poverty, 88%. Today, the rate has fallen to less than 1%. And I explain how it happened. And it's very easy. They started to introduce private property, more market elements. Of course, China is not an example of a pure capitalist state. By the way, there is no pure capitalist state nowhere in the world, not in Spain, even not in the United States. All the systems are a mixture. But what is very important, if you want to explain the progress in China, how did it happen that so many people hundreds of millions escaped extreme poverty. You have to understand this is the power of capitalism, nothing else. And this is how the book starts. Yes, and then I compare, maybe we can speak about it, a lot of other countries. Maybe we can speak, for example, about North and South Korea, because this is also a very interesting example.
Because sometimes we say that the big problem in economics is that theories can propose many different systems, but as you discussed, then reality is limited. However, in the case of Germany or Korea, the country was literally split in half. So we have real world evidence of how opposing systems work out. And in both cases, unfortunately, for those living in the east of Germany and in the north of Korea, that experiment was not short-lived, but rather long-lasting. So these consequences have been very real, and they highlight very different outcomes from very different systems.
Absolutely. So as I said in the beginning, so you can compare, you should only compare things that you can compare. And this is very easy with Germany and with North Korea, because Germany and Korea, the East and the West, or the South and the North, all they have the same language, the same culture, the same history. But what was different was the economic system. What a lot of people don't know is that even in the 60s, Korea, North and South Korea, was as poor as the poorest countries today in Africa. So poor as the poorest countries in Africa. This is not only true for North Korea, but it was the same for South Korea in the 60s. And then, North Korea decided for planned economy. South Korea decided for the capitalist way. And I've been in South Korea. By the way, my book was number one in the nonfiction books in South Korea. It's also translated in Korea. And I was there and I saw shopping centers. To be honest, I've never saw shopping centers like this in Europe. So, and this happened only in some decades. This is the secret of the power of capitalism. And you know how it is in North Korea. People are still with starvation. They have hunger. And one thing additional. People try to flee from North Korea to South Korea. But have you ever heard that someone's trying to flee from South Korea to North Korea? This didn't happen. Or have you ever heard that someone tries to flee from maybe Miami to Cuba, or from Chile to Venezuela, or from West Germany to East Germany? It never happened. Yes, it's always from socialism to capitalism. And with Germany, where I'm living, it's the same. What a lot of people don't know, only some numbers. With cars, for example, cars in Germany. In East Germany, you had to wait between 12 and 17 years for a car. Yes, you had to subscribe in a list, and then if you were happy, 12 years, if not so happy, 17 years, and then you could choose between two cars. You can Google it in the internet. We call it Trabant at Wartburg, very strange cars. In West Germany, you could go to every store, and if you have enough money to buy, whether it is a Mercedes or a BMW or whether it's a Volkswagen. So, and with telephone, it was the same. In West Germany, 93% of the people had a telephone in 1989. When the wall came down. In East Germany, it was only 16%. 16%, especially members of the party. And so there are a lot of other numbers that show that. So in whichever country you look, if you don't talk about theory, but about real life history, then you see that capitalism is more effective. But I know if you discuss with socialists, and I think even in Spain, if you discuss now with this communist candidates there, I'm sure they will tell you, forget about all these examples from history. This is not what we want. We want something, in most countries, they call it democratic socialism. And so I have also 2 chapters about these experiments with democratic socialism. It was in the 70s in the UK and in the 70s in Sweden. And both of them...
Let's touch upon those, because these are basically 2 experiments that were very widely praised, and many on the European left were very excited about, mostly the Scandinavian model, which nowadays has been mostly reformed and turned into a rather classical liberal system in which there is a lot more economic freedom than people think. So let's first go to the UK, because a lot of people don't know this, but in the late 70s, it was actually bailed out by the International Monetary Fund, and
yes.
it's known as the sick man of Europe. So the typical thing we would have said about Greece in the last financial crisis was said about the UK not so long ago, right before the Margaret Thatcher era. And that was the result of that democratic socialism.
Exactly, and this is, this is the reason why I wrote this book, because if you talk to young people, I don't know why, or maybe I know why, they don't learn it in school and they don't learn it in university. What happened? This was absolutely a disaster. You mentioned it. Even the World Monetary Fund had to support the UK. Usually it is only for the third world countries, and so many people were out of work, and there was a very high inflation rate. It was in the worst condition after the experiment of democratic socialism. For example, the tax rates for income tax in the UK were 83% at this time, 83%. And there were even higher taxes for some capital income, capital gains, 98%. But this was not all. If I talk about Sweden, it was worse. And I can tell maybe a funny story about Sweden. Even the supporters of socialism in Sweden in the 70s, like Astrid Lindgren, maybe some of you know them. She was an author for books for children, very famous. I don't know whether she's famous in Spain, yes, but in
the Pomperiposa books in Spain, they were called Pipi Calzas Largas. So for our viewers, those stories that many of us read as children, she was the author.
Yes, exactly. And she's also very popular everywhere in the world, in Germany. And she sympathized with, she was more to the left with the social democrats. Yes? But then one day she saw how many taxes she had to pay. And she calculated it, and it was 102%. 102%. And then she wrote a big article, an op-ed in one of the largest Swedish newspapers, like a tax fairy tale about this stuff. But the finance minister of Sweden said, oh, forget about it. She should go on writing fairy tales, but she understands nothing about taxes and the numbers are wrong. But they were correct. And in the end, the Swedish prime minister at this time, Olof Palme, social democrat, had to excuse and said she was right. But as you mentioned before, Swedish people are very clever and they abolished all this system. And today, okay, in Sweden you have high income taxes, this is true. But for example, you have no wealth tax, you have no inheritance tax and so. And if you look at the, maybe we can speak later about the index of economic freedom. This is a comparison how economic free are different countries. You can't see any difference between Sweden and the United States, for example. This is what a lot of people don't know. They speak about Swedish socialism, and forget it. It was 40 years ago. Today is something else. Today Sweden is as capitalist as the United States. And this has improved the living conditions, not only for rich people, but much more for poor people. And this is maybe my most important message with this book. I think for the strong people, for rich people, capitalism is not so important, because in every system in history, the strong people, the rich people, they could come along in any way. But for poor people, for poor people, it's so important. And I give you one number. And if you only, everyone in our audience, if you only remember this one number, then this interview was worth for you to see it. 200 years ago, before capitalism, 90% of the worldwide population was living in extreme poverty, 90%. Today, the rate has fallen to less than 10%, And what is more important, half of this reduction happened over the last 35 years. A lot of people don't know it. And why is this so important? If you listen to anti-capitalists, like the French economist Thomas Piketty, for example, he says the last 30 or 40 years are the worst are very bad because social inequality, the gap between the rich and the poor, is rising. And I don't will discuss whether it is true or not, but to be honest, I don't care about inequality. I care about poor people. And if it is true that so many people came out of extreme poverty, then why should I care about social inequality? I come back to the example of China. Of course, 40 years ago, there were no billionaires. This is true. Yesterday, I saw a list. There are so many billionaires in China as in no other country in the world, with exception of the United States. And even if you look at the ultra high net worth individuals, the number is so high in China as in no other country in the world, with the exception of the United States. So what do I want to say with this? At the same time, when the number of billionaires and millionaires increased, the number of people living in poverty decreased. And I think this is the important thing. I was very often in China, and I had there some lectures. And if I asked the people, who's better off today than his parents, everyone raised his hands. Do you think these people would like to go back 40 years back because everyone was more equal in this time? I don't think so. And so this is the question, whether you focus on inequality or you focus on poverty.
I think that one of the key messages in your book as well is that by diving into this real world example, you've debunked so many myths. And at the end of the day, one of the key messages, I think, that comes with this release, once again, el capitalismo no es el problema, es la solución. Capitalism is not the problem, it's the solution. Is that those that speak in the name of the poor often hurt the poor by promoting that type of policies. You mentioned the case of Sweden. Sweden created 0 net jobs in the private sector between 1960 and 1990, which is astonishing. Another example in Democratic Socialism is Spain. Spain had a great leadership under Felipe González from 82 to 96. He was virtually unopposed. 14 years of the Social Democrats in power with their social democratic model. And there was 0 net creation. There were 12 million people working in 1982, 12 million people still working in 1996. So no jobs created whatsoever. Rainer, let me move on to the topic of the intellectuals, which I think is perhaps one of the big issues with capitalism. Capitalism doesn't have that many people standing up for it. And many writers have been, theorized about this. Joseph Schumpeter, for example, even worried that there would be an end to the capitalistic system because no one would be able to stand up for it, and the intellectuals would take over with their criticism of the system. Deirdre McCloskey, she's become also very famous in the last few years for discussing these topics. But I think you've really written about the specifics of intellectuals, the economics of intellectuals, and then some of the reasoning behind why intellectuals oppose capitalism systematically in so many cases.
Yes, a good question. And to be honest, this is my favorite chapter in this book, and not only mine. A lot of people told me. But
mine as well. I never told you that. I never disclosed that with the audience. I forgot. I had the honor to translate this book to Spanish.
Yes,
that's the one I enjoyed the most, that chapter.
Thank you very much. But please allow me, before we come to this, because I think a lot of people, maybe in South America, listen to us as well. I want to say only a few words about one very important chapter. This is where I compare Chile.
Venezuela, by all means, please. Go ahead.
And then we come to intellectuals. What a lot of people don't know today is that 1970, Venezuela was one of the 20 richest countries in the world. One of the 20 richest.
And it was the Latin American version of Norway.
Yeah, and of course the richest in South America. So then they started with a lot of not real socialism or something like this, but a lot of labor market regulation. They had so high labor market regulation like almost no other country in the world. And it's of course what happened. It started to get worse. And then 1999 there was Hugo Chavez, who promised what they called the socialism in the 21st century. And the intellectuals all over the world, they were so enthusiastic because, they had no other role model. The Soviet Union was not would you say, North Korea is not so, as a socialist utopia, don't fit so. But now they had it. Socialism in 21st century Venezuela. And to be honest, it started well, this experiment, because he had good luck with the oil prices going up in the first years. And, there's no country in the world, even not Saudi Arabia, that has so much oil as Venezuela. And so it was good luck for Hugo Chavez because the country became rich, and he even, of course, he helped Cuba, but he even told he wanted to help American workers and for everyone. So, but then oil prices dropped, and in the first years, he started with all this stupid socialist program, nationalization. He didn't not only nationalized the big oil company, but other companies. And what happened? What's the end? It's a total disaster. Today, more than 10% of the population of Venezuela fled to other countries in South America. The people who still live there, they're starvation. They're hungry. They don't have enough to eat. And the inflation rate, I don't know how high it is today at this moment, but when I wrote the book, it was 1 billion%, as high as nowhere in the world. I think you even can't measure it. So it was a total disaster. And it was not only a total disaster in the economy, but also with freedom. Yes, because people are oppressed. There's no more freedom of the press and. So I compare Venezuela with Chile. In Chile, they had also an experiment with democratic socialism with Salvador Allende, who was elected president. This was also a total disaster in economic. Then came Pinochet, who was a dictator, and I'm not for Pinochet, absolute against it. There were torture and so, and in a way it was a dictatorship, but in the economics it was not so bad. On the contrary, he had good consultants. They call them the Chicago Boys, these economists who were influenced by Milton Friedman. And so the economy became better and better in this time. And then good for the people in Chile happened two things. First of all, dictatorship of Pinochet came to an end. I think this was good. But what was as important as this, that the governments, the democratic governments after Pinochet, they went on this way with free market economy, with capitalism. So even when there were leftist governments in Chile, it was the same, by the way, in the UK after Margaret Thatcher. Tony Blair, he saw it was so successful and he was so clever that he didn't change it. Or Bill Clinton in the United States, after Ronald Reagan, yes. And so it was the same in Chile. And the result now, Chile is today the most capitalist country in South America. And of course, they have also problems like every country in the world has its own problems. But if you compare it with other countries in South America, they have the people are much better off there. And they had over the years increase on average of 5% growth in the GDP. And so you see, always if you compare it, real life history, and this is my message. And now we come to the intellectuals. Intellectuals, they don't compare this real life experiments. They have, I have a new idea, I have there a book, and they have their utopia, their ideal, and then they compare it with a reality. And I think it's as stupid as maybe your wife or your girlfriend, yes, if she reads maybe this love romance books about, the ideal great love where there's always harmony, and then she comes one day to you and said, I think our marriage, yes, we have to divorce, our marriage is so bad, yes, now I know how it should be, I read it in this book. I think you would tell her, please, this is a little bit stupid, please compare our real life marriage, please compare it with others, maybe from our friends. This is fair, and this is what I'm doing. But intellectuals, so why intellectuals don't like capitalism? It's not so easy to explain. I think there are two reasons. First reason is intellectuals, they like and love theory, to construct something. And because for this, we need them for theories. For capitalism, they are not so important because capitalism, it was not, it developed not in this way that someone wrote a book like maybe Adam Smith and then told the government, now you should implement this, what I wrote in this book. This was not how capitalism was implemented, but capitalism is more like something that developed spontaneously, like languages. For example, it's not like, there's one language that is a construct, Esperanto, but I think only very few people on the world speak Esperanto. All the other languages, they develop more natural, spontaneously. And this is the way capitalism developed. But with socialism, it's another thing. When I was young, I was also a communist, and my favorite book was a book. I don't know I only know the title in German. If you would translate it, what should be done from Lenin?
¿Qué hacer de Lenin?
Yes, and there he said the socialism don't comes from the workers' movement, but it always comes from intelligentsia, from intellectuals, and we have to bring it to the workers. And this is very good for intellectuals, so they have definitely a very important role, and with capitalism not so. But then there's another reason. For example, my parents, I came as well from an intellectual family, academic, and so I know if you grow up in an academic background, you learn one thing. If you read more books than other people, you are more important. The most important thing is not how many money. This is really intellectuals, they don't like, of course, they like money like everyone else, but much more important is them how many books have you. I see there in their background you have a lot of books, and I'm convinced you have much more in your house, yes? And the more books you have, the more books you read, the higher you have. And then if you have
social signaling.
Yes, and if you have a doctor, a PhD, or like I even too, or a professor and wrote a lot of books like me, then you should be number one. But and if they go to school, teachers tell them the same story. And then they go to university, and their professor tell them the same story, of course, because they did never something else in their whole life, yes? what did the professor do? He went to school, then to university, and then he stayed there in university. And so this is his value system. And then is the experience for these intellectuals that in real life economy, then there is their former school neighbor who was maybe very bad at school with bad grades, but he has now maybe a little company or a middle-sized company and makes much more money than he has. He has the bigger house, the bigger car, and what's really frustrating for him, his wife is much prettier than his wife is. So, and he sees this in this moment. Yes, the intellectual. Something has to be wrong with the market. Something has to be wrong with capitalism, because I read so much more books and I have 1 or 2 doctor degrees. He has none. And I know him from school. He was not so as good as I was at school. He had always bad grades. And then he says something about social justice. It's not okay. The market has bad results. And so we have to correct it, or maybe to abolish capitalism. And this is why, because the intellectuals, they don't understand how important implicit learning is. Please, let's explain me something about it, because this is very important to understand the reason. In psychology, we distinguish between 2 ways of learning. The one way is implicit learning. It means learning by doing, or the school of life. For example, I spoke for my doctoral dissertation with a lot of wealthy people, and I asked them about their youth, their childhood, when they were at school and university, and they were engaged in early entrepreneurial activities, or a lot of them were competitive athletes, and they learned. Implicit learning means you learn, but you don't know that you are learning in this time. So implicit learning results in implicit knowledge, or I have an easier word for it, intuition or gut feeling. And this is very important for the entrepreneur. But then there's another way to learn, academic learning. You call it explicit learning, academic learning. And the academics, the intellectuals, they understand only the importance of academic learning. They don't understand that implicit learning is sometimes much more important than explicit learning, especially if I speak about entrepreneurship. And so I think it's a combination of many factors, and I admit it's not so easy to explain in an interview. So I recommend to every one of you, read the book and read the chapter in this book, and you will learn why intellectuals don't like or love capitalism.
Well, don't hesitate to pick up this book. We're out of time, but we've spent the last several minutes discussing it. El capitalismo no es el problema, es la solución. The good thing about this, I relate to it. My previous book was also very practical. So for anyone that is looking, for actual data, actual proof, actual systems, actual models, how do they work in this big fight that we have going on in Spain? Comunismo o libertad, something which sounds completely out of character with a country like ours, which has developed itself over 40 years by embracing capitalism. But if we are to have this debate, we need more books like this. So it's at Unión Editorial, as you know, you're one of the main publishers for classical liberal books in our country. Our author, Rainer Zitelmann, was kind enough to join us for this dissertation. And we will have a lot more on this book in the coming weeks, in the media, in other initiatives, and so on. But I do want to thank you, Rainer, for spending a few minutes with us and discussing the main comings of. Can you try to say the title in Spanish?
Yes, show me count. Yes, el capitalismo no es el problema, es la solution. Maybe.
There you go.
But I appreciate very much, and I look very much forward to come to Spain. I got my first vaccine 4 weeks ago. The next one I will get in the end of June. And if it is possible to travel again with coronavirus, I'm definitely, first I will come to Spain, but I'm invited also to Paraguay to speak there about this book in Paraguay. And if I be in Paraguay, I would love very much if someone listens to us now from other South American countries. Definitely, I will come there. Invite me. I pay for it. I'm rich. I can pay. I pay for travel. I pay for hotel. But I love it because I have at my home, a car of the whole world. And there's one place, yes, and this is South America. I will start now, and this is so. I thank you very much that you translated this book, and we can tell maybe our audience in a couple of months we will have the next book in Spain and the next. And I was very happy for this, and I appreciate it.
You know who also has a map like this? Jose Piñera, one of the leading Chicago boys in Chile, and he always likes to pinpoint every country which is visited, and he. Like you, is a great missionary of capitalism, which is great. I mean, you've done it. You're a best-selling author, a millionaire yourself, coming from, not bad, coming from a socialist youth like you and many other young people. But thank you, Rainer. That was so fun and so interesting. Thank you all for joining us. Volvemos muy pronto con más actividades del Instituto Juan de Mariana y gracias por seguirnos en España, en América y en todo el mundo. Muchas gracias.